All right.
Okay. So I have started the recording so that we can have this for later as well.
Okay, so for the ESEA maintenance of effort, we have sections in our statute 111, 18, and 8521, and it basically focuses on your general expenses and requires you to spend 90% of local funds when compared from one year to the next. So it gives you quite a variability of 10%. So, and it's not based on whether you spend things in this category or that category. Those specifics do not really impact this. It's just your total aggregate expenditures as compared from one year to the next. And it can be aggregate or it can be based on a per pupil amount. So in general, we would compare the 2021 school year funds to the 1920, and for maintenance of effort on your FY23 ESEA allocations. If you don't meet the 90%, then there will be a reduction on your LEA's FY23 ESEA allocation. So next slide. The expenditures that are included when calculating maintenance of effort is administration, instruction, attendance and health services, pupil transportation services, operation and maintenance of plant, fixed charges, and net expenditures to cover deficits for food service and student body activities. Some of the expenditures that are excluded are expenditures for community services, capital outlay, debt service, or supplemental expenses made as a result of a presidentially declared disaster are not to be included in the determination. In addition, any expenditures made from funds provided by the federal government are excluded from the determination. So this will become an important piece when we move forward into looking at the expenditures for these past couple years, and or at least 1920 and 2021. This will become important as we move toward using those years for maintenance of effort. Jenny's asking, when does the review take place? We do this in the spring. So right now, the way it works is the department's finance team pulls together all the local general expenses and actually does the maintenance of effort calculation. So they use those year's expenditures, the appropriate year's expenditures. Then they average the enrollment, the October and April enrollment, average that out, and that number helps to determine the per pupil number. And then they compare and determine those that don't meet. And then they forward that spreadsheet to the ESEA team, and then we take it from there. And we're doing that right now as we speak for our FY21 ESEA allocations. Next slide. So if a district does not make their maintenance of effort, and I take a look at different data to try to get them to that 90%, a reduction, if a reduction is made, it would be in proportion by which the LEA failed to meet that 90%. So if you were at 86%, you could possibly lose up to 4% of your ESEA funding. There is a waiver that can be issued by the SEA to an LEA once in a 5-year period. We've just had a few of those, a small handful, 4 or 5 over the past since FY18. And then in addition, if there were some exceptional uncontrollable circumstances, the LEA can apply to the Esea once they've had their waiver, and we can then send that request on to the Secretary of Education, who could waive the maintenance of effort under the two situations below: uncontrollable circumstances or natural disaster, or precipitous decline in financial resources, which through these times right now could apply. So there are some waivers that can be issued. We can go to the next. I think that was the last slide. Yeah. So there are some questions. We answered Jenny's. We may not make maintenance of effort during 1920 due to COVID. Will there be a general exemption? So the expenses for 1920 will be compared to 1819 for the FY22. Hopefully I'm doing the calculations right. Your FY22 allocations. So it'll be next spring when this is done, and we would have to see, you may be able to get a waiver under the general once in a 5-year, or there could be some general exemptions that are occurring across the country because of the implications of the 1920 year. Will the slides be available, Tyler?
Yes, they will be. We will add them to the CARES Act webpage. Any material that we share during office hours will begin to populate on that webpage that we shared with you. I'll also put the webpage here in the chat for those of you that did not get it last week. Are there any other questions for Jackie before we hand it over to Barb to talk about special services and their maintenance of effort?
Good morning, everyone. This is Barb. I guess I'll just jump in, and Jackie, if there's questions for you along the way, we can always stop and let you answer them.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm here to talk about maintenance of effort with regard to IDA. It's a bit more strict than what you see for ESSA. There are no one-time waivers. It's a set in stone, no waivers granted, maintenance of effort requirement. So I wanted to start by talking about what it is and why it is. And so I think it's important to understand that way back in the past, when budgets had to be cut, districts would look towards special education because it's one of the larger costs in the district. And they would, look to cut some budget out of the special ed category. And the feds came in and they said, no, we're not going to allow you to do that. What we're going to do is require you to spend at least as much as you did in the prior year on the education of children with disabilities, or you will lose a subsequent federal dollar. So every year that you have your total special education costs, it sets a new benchmark for you. And you must meet that benchmark year over year in order to meet maintenance of effort. If you fail to meet maintenance of effort, the state is required to pay back to the feds in non-federal dollars the amount that you missed by up to your total award. And then what we in turn do is we take it back through your subsidy. We try to do that in either 12 or 24 months to try to mitigate the impact on your school finances. I did put together a PowerPoint. I tried to go with a visual this time, so bear with me. You're the first ones to see it. It's only 3 slides long, so it's not long, but hopefully it helps to kind of put it into perspective. So I'm going to share my screen. We're going to see how this goes. So let's see. Which one is it? Screen 2. Can you see it?
We can see it.
You can see it, okay. So I put together some slides. Oh, geez. I don't know what you're seeing. Is it a mess? Hold on.
Looks good, Barb. You're just not in presentation mode yet, that's all.
Is it now?
Yes.
I've got too many screens in front of me. Okay, so maintenance of effort. Here we go. I want you to think in terms of, so think about last year. Assume that your actual costs for special education ran $500,000. You had an IDA award of about $150,000. So your breakout was $350 out of your general fund to pay for those costs and $150 of federal funds. So what happens is you established a benchmark of $350,000 in general fund expenditures. So thinking forward to this year, you must spend at least $350,000 in order to meet maintenance of effort out of your general funds. Unfortunately, moving into this coming year, we're looking at potentially some exceptional special education costs because of COVID-19 and all of the summer school, ESY, compensatory services. Fortunately, there are additional federal funds available to help compensate for that. But I want to talk about why you make the decisions whether or not you want to use those federal funds on specific things. So if a district decides they're going to take their CARES funds and they're not going to spend it on special education, they have other things, more pressing things they need to take care of. So they decide, no, we're not going to use the CARES fund. We're going to stay with our IDA award, and we're going to pay for the rest of it out of general fund. What you end up doing is you end up rising, you raise that level of effort $100,000. So you establish a new benchmark. And then what happens when you return to your normal budget and you have your normal award is you spend $350,000 because that's all you had to spend. The costs are no longer there. And you can see that you have a default. So when you're thinking in terms of maintenance of effort, you always want to be thinking about where that watermark is, where that level of effort sits. That can be impacted by revenue. So we've had districts in the past who did not charge for special ed tuition, who decided that they were going to start charging some special ed tuition to districts that send children to them. That revenue is subtracted from your total expenditures. So you inadvertently, you're doing good for your district, but you're lowering your level of effort, and you won't meet your benchmark. So that is my visual. I don't know if it's helpful or not. I'd love your feedback. But the thing to think about is if you have costs above and beyond your normal for special education, it is a good time to spend federal funds to pay for those. Because you don't want to you don't want to move your general fund expenditures too broadly. So you want to keep it somewhat stable. I think that's it. Any questions? It looks like the chat box is going crazy.
Well, so yeah, so we do have a few questions and a couple of comments. So people really did appreciate the visual that you provided, Barb. So that was very helpful. So actually the first question is, in the CARES Act application, how specific does the language need to be in regards to purchasing devices, internet, etc.? Do you have to name the exact equipment purchase, or can you be more general? So although it was addressed to Chelsea, I think I'll probably answer that, because this is really going to come down to you will have to at least be slightly specific in what you're purchasing. So what you can't say is, well, we're going to purchase technology, because within technology there is a whole range of object codes that could be used for technology, and even more generally, that could fall into different functions. So, and I'm throwing out a bunch of how we talk about expenditures, but it's just to say, well, so instead of saying we're buying technology, we're buying devices so that the students can access their instruction. I think, so for my purposes at least, that would at least help me know that I would be looking at for those expenditures to be in your instruction function code, and I know to look at the different device object codes when those expenditures come in. So you can't do a high level, we're going to do technology, but you don't have to go down to the level of saying we're going to buy 56 laptops for students in these different buildings. Some of that we will have to just flesh out as the reimbursements come in, to ensure that what you said you spent the money on is what you actually did spend the money on. So in some of those, you would just expect for us to ask for a little additional backup as we're processing those invoices.
So on that first page, I just want to add one thing, because I think Tyler did a nice job talking about the budget, but on the program side, the side that I would have to look at, you would need to establish in your description of your needs that there are 57 kids that do not have connectivity, so you are going to spend your money to address that issue.
Yep.
And then, of course, we wouldn't want you to say, I'm going to spend all the money on this product, an Apple or a Microsoft product, because you're likely in the middle of negotiations and you may get a better deal from one vendor or the other, and you have the right to go with whatever works best for you. But we do need to have that ballpark when you discuss the needs assessment that you did at the front end. So it's that just one paragraph of how did you establish where you're going to spend money and what are the needs? That's where I'd be looking for it. So then Tyler would be looking for it in the budget, where you would give a bit, a couple of sentences about why that money's being spent under that fund code. And then on the very back end, when your business office submits the reimbursement request, we're just looking back to see, okay, their needs assessment said that they were in fact buying tablets, and their budget aligns with that, and the fund codes are accurate, and they match this invoice. We can approve the invoice and cut a check and send it in the mail.
And hopefully you've signed up for direct deposit so that you can get it even much sooner. I'll throw a pitch in there for Paula. So the next question is the CARES Act fund, Barb, reference an earmarked IDA line of the allocation? So when you're asking this question, I'm suspecting you're talking about the CARES Act allocation, Mary?
Yeah, I knew that question would stump you. I don't know how to ask it. Barb had $150,000 up there. Was she just prefacing the next part of the presentation that said that was about maintenance of effort, and if we decide to forego one thing, we'd end up raising our maintenance of effort. I didn't quite understand that whole logic, and I'd love to hear that again. But other than that, Barb, I thought that was fantastic for someone like me who doesn't fully understand maintenance of effort. I suddenly do. So thank you very much.
So Mary, those numbers were purely fictitious.
Yeah, okay, but does the CARES Act earmark money for special education, I guess is what I'm asking. And were you saying that we could decide not to use it for that? Or was that just you saying that if we decide to use CARES Act money for special education costs, unless they come in that category that Carolyn mentioned, we're going to increase maintenance of effort? Is it as simple as that?
It is. I was simply saying, when you're looking at what your expenditures are going to be for the next year, because right now costs are actually down for some districts. Next year, they're likely to rise exponentially. To make sure that if you choose to deploy CARES funding on IDA activities, allowable activities, that you do so for the additional costs. To be careful not to just throw the federal funds in there, which would cause you to lower or heighten, depending on what you do. You know, if you don't spend any or if you spend too much, it's both sides of that line. You just have to make sure you stay consistent in what you've been spending with general funds in special education.
Can you back up to one thing you just said? Did you say be sure to use it on the additional costs?
If you choose,
there are results of COVID-19, will that kind of create a buffer against MOE? Is that what you're saying? So we have a cost about, you know, we have to, you know, make up some education that didn't happen during this time. And we use CARES Act money for some of that education. Are you saying that won't factor into maintenance of effort, or it will?
So the only thing maintenance of effort looks at are your general fund expenditures. So you don't have a benchmark with respect to federal funds. We don't even look at them. If something is coded to federal funds, we don't even look at them. It's simply what you paid for with your general funds. So you want to make sure that if you spent $350,000 last year, that you still maintain that $350,000. But being mindful that you don't want to increase that to $500,000 this year because of those services that you talked about, because the following year, you're going to have that benchmark at $500,000 without those exceptional costs. So you
I think I said that backwards. So if we have extra costs, you're saying use CARES Act money if we can.
I'm saying it's a good use of your, again, your district has to decide how to deploy them, but it is a good use of them.
Okay, thanks very much. That was a great explanation.
So, and this next question is for you as well, Barb. Due to the COVID-19, we are not spending as much for some special ed services during fiscal year 20. Will there be a way to adjust maintenance of effort for this year?
There have been no waivers granted in maintenance of effort. And yes, this is going to be a bumpy year. All I can advise you to do is to really track personnel that have come and gone, kids that are graduating, kids that have graduated from special ed to regular ed, have moved out of the district, because these are all allowable exceptions, and we're going to have to probably really dig through and find all of the exceptions for a lot of districts this year.
And so Carolyn is actually noting some of those exceptions that are allowable. So Barb has said them, and then you can also, if you want to, you can read them in the chat. That
yeah, it's on the CARES, the slide deck that we put together. It's on the CARES website.
Okay, so an additional place to find that information. So, and so Cindy, can we use these funds to make renovations to the nurses area to deal with new COVID-19 issues? So I don't know if we've gotten renovation questions in the past. I don't know if that one and something like that has come up.
It hasn't, but we will put that in the list that will go to our program coordinator in DC this week. So thank you for the question. We'll get you an answer as soon as possible.
And then another question, can we use the funds to help with graduation costs that are now applicable due to COVID, such as video costs for the ceremony? And I believe the answer will be the same for that. If we've asked it, I do not believe we've gotten an answer back yet. And if we haven't asked it, we will ask it. And Sandra is asking, I understand the exceptions for student movement and teacher retirement. However, due to COVID, we are not paying out costs for PT, OT, etc., which are a large piece of our budget. That may trigger not being in compliance. Is there an exemption to cover this case? And so I think Barbara's answered to, at least to a point. IDA doesn't allow any, it doesn't have any exemptions. And so I don't know if you want to add to that, Barbara.
Just that up to this point, IDA has not allowed for any waivers of the rules. So if the time comes and we run into maintenance of effort issues, call me and we'll look through everything to find all the exceptions that we can. And hopefully that will be enough to meet that benchmark.
So we have a question, can we use CARES funds to pay for the extra food service staff during the summer to help get food out to our families? So I know we initially, in the presentation that I created, what we've said is there is an activity where it appears that this would be an allowable use of the funds. And so Adam is asking, please remind me, when MOE is calculated, does it simply look at all general fund special ed expenditures from the prior year, or are any expenditures excluded? Thank you.
No, if it's coded special ed and it was paid for with general funds, it applies to your maintenance of effort.
And then Kirsten is asking, can we purchase items now and get reimbursed for CARES funding later, even though the application hasn't been submitted and amounts awarded yet? So any expenditure that would be allowable and occurred on or after March 13th would be allowed to be included in your application. Chelsea, do you want to add anything to that?
Nope,
Okay.
That's exactly it. And that's included in our FAQ document.
Yep.
I will add that won't help your maintenance of effort because it's paid for with federal funds, what the cost you're talking about.
And Stacy is asking, weren't we told to continue to pay our OT-PT contractors? So there is language in the CARES Act funding that says to continue paying staff and contractors as I don't remember the exact wording, but as much as feasible.
To the extent practicable.
Yeah. So that was right in the CARES Act. The CARES Act. So that was all the questions that I'm seeing in my chat. Did anybody else from DOE had some other questions that they received directly?
Tyler, this is Mary. Could I ask, last time I listened in, you were talking about the 9%, 91%, and then there was a further calculation that had to do with multiplying by 0.8 and 0.1. What was that? And is that helpful to even pursue this, to sort of ballpark the SAU's allocation?
So previously, I mean, so we've put out a couple of times around that what the state has received in the CARES Act funding is 80% of our Title I allocation. And then the CARES Act requires us to allocate at least 90%, though Maine has chosen to allocate 91% to the school units. And if you wanted to use that as a rough estimate as to what your district would receive to budget at this point in time, then that's the best that we are able to do it at currently. There are, I mean, the equitable services will play into how those allocations actually go out to each of the SAUs.
So I guess I'm struggling to make the leap from 91% goes out to individual SAU
Well,
in
so
a ballpark qualified way. I know
So-
that there are
yeah.
equitable services and all that.
right. So if we were to take this calculation as pure, if your district, say, received $100 in Title I funds, if you played this calculation out and you multiplied that by the 0.8, you would
Okay.
then you would have
That helps.
$80, and then you would again multiply that by 0.91.
Okay.
And that would give you a very rough estimate as to what you might receive.
So when you say the state gets 80% of its Title I allocation, that same 80%
Yep.
is the first step at the SAU.
Right.
What was the second part?
91%. 91%.
Yeah. All right. Thanks. I realize it's risky to make that calculation without the equitable services piece factored in. Chelsea, any progress on that? Getting reconciliation between guidance and law?
So last night we had a call with leaders across the country that are grappling with this issue. And we know that Alaska, Arkansas, and Virginia have all decided to follow the guidance. So the guidance being you would provide equitable services based on student counts in private schools that are in your location. And several other states have still said they are not willing to take that leap. But they are also clear and understand that the moment, possibly we all go with statute, right? We go with the law and that interpretation. It could be the possible situation where you're in a single audit and your auditor says to you as an SAU, well, I'm looking at the equitable services guidance right here, Mary. It seems you've decided not to follow the guidance. I'm going to give you a finding. Right, and we all know kind of how that process could play out potentially. So the finding could then be reported. It then could also move up to the U.S. Department of Education, and then they could have to decide whether or not they would enforce that finding and if there would be consequences. So I think a lot of states are exactly where Maine is, and they've just said we just need a little bit more time. I was surprised to hear that there are a few states that have decided to follow the guidance.
Should we all band together?
That's exactly what we're doing. So we have Jackie Godbout and Monique Sullivan from our Title I team have been fabulous, and they've run the numbers for both options, and they provided it, to those national partners as well as members of Congress are looking at this. But here's the problem, right? If you wait for Congress to act, it could be a month, 2 months, 3 months until something materializes. And at that point, we will have already had to put the funding out, applications would be approved, and money would be flowing to districts. And so that is why we've said we're just going to take a few more days to see how things are settling across the country. We are not in a place where we are comfortable making a decision today.
Just one more question. Is there an explanation of the difference between the guidance and the law somewhere in a prior video? Okay, I'll go try to find it.
Well, and there's a question over here about where do the previous videos live? And they do live on the Business Manager webpage. But we're also trying to make sure if we say something, we put it in writing for you. So we have a couple of notices that have gone out about equitable services and where and why we are where we are in our decision making. So we'll make sure that by the end of this week, that website is fully complete with everything we've put out to date, because I know it's a lot of information coming at everyone very quickly.
So, and I'll in a minute I'll go over for the business managers and those others that have access to the teams, so that they can know how to get to that. And so I believe we've answered Heather's question around the timeline window in the sense that we are still waiting on that guidance. Otherwise, we are ready to release it, but we need to have an answer that we're satisfied with it as to our current question. So I'm going to share.
Also,
Yep.
We're all working really hard to make sure that when this application is released, you can quickly submit everything that you've been working on over the past few weeks. So yesterday we talked about giving you topics for these office hours, and Tyler's already prepared for our next topic next week. So all of those fun codes and conversations about what the budget page will look like, we will discuss next Monday and Tuesday. So if you weren't planning to join us, you might want to set aside 10 to 11, because now you'll be able to have by midweek next week, both your narrative version of the application complete as well as your budget pages. So we are still moving forward in terms of preparing the application for you to be able to complete it quickly. And hopefully by next week, I'll have more information to share with you. But we will continue to be very transparent about where we are and why there is a delay if it continues to exist.
So I'm going to share my screen really quick. And I'm going to have to do what everybody else has done and figure out which one. And I know I have a couple of additional requests as to people wanting access to this, and I will get to those today. So once you're actually logged into Teams, it won't look exactly like this, just because I have some internal DOE teams that I am part of. The one that you will see from the department is this DOE-School Finance. And you need to make sure that you're on General. So this is the General. If you just click on General, this is what will come up, and it'll show you everybody that's been added and some questions that have come through. And then you want to click on Files up top here. And once you click on that, you'll see previous meetings that have been recorded and uploaded. And so I am a couple of days behind on uploading meetings. And some of that is we're trying to make sure that what we're uploading is meaningful. So so that's how you would get to any of the previous recordings that we have uploaded.
I have a few questions that have come in to me privately. I'm going to share those now. One question being, if I have a private school in my location, should I simply ask for the enrollment counts and figure out what the impact might be? My suggestion right now would be, it would not be a good use of your time to try to do a consultation or to collect enrollment numbers. When we know more, we'll give you a heads up so that you'll have time to do that tough work. But I also know it takes hours to do that with each private school. And I wouldn't want it to be time wasted, because I know you were all working very hard and working incredibly long hours already. The other question came to say, what does it mean that equitable services would be provided based on N count? You've said that a few times, and I must be missing something. So the guidance, we've put it on our webpage so that you can read it, so you'll have an idea of what the U.S. Department of Ed did release. But as I've said on previous calls, the Maine Department of Education has received, some consultation from the Attorney General's office, as well as leaders across the country, and the concern is that there's a conflict. I apologize. Earlier I mentioned I have little people at home. My 2-year-old was having a conversation about his snacks, so sorry for the delay. But what I mean by N count is that the number of students enrolled in that private school, if you went with the guidance, would be a part of the calculation, regardless of whether or not they are low-income students. So I really don't think it's a good use of your time, again, with this one, to figure out any of that, or to even take much time trying to consider what that might look like. The next question that just came in, when is it time? When should I begin consultation, knowing that that will be required, regardless of which direction we move in? I'm just going to ask you to be patient and wait until next week. I think by next week we'll have a clearer sense of where everyone in the country is going with this. And someone said earlier, let's band together. That's exactly what Commissioner Macon has been doing. She has regular calls with commissioners and chiefs across the country, and we're trying to get a better handle on who is committed to sticking with statute, so that we can all do that together But at this point, I would not consult with them. I would give it at least another week. But I also want to acknowledge that on our call yesterday, many states have not yet even applied for ESSER funding. So we're not behind. I know we need the money quickly, but many states have not even received the approval grant award notification. So we're doing okay here, and we'll have more information next week.
I did get an email with a couple of questions we'll throw out there, and I think we can add them to our list, and I will forward them on to JC so that to ensure that she can, instead of having to write them down, she can add them. And one of them we have covered, and which is, can the CARES Act cover audiovisual equipment needed to have a drive-in type graduation? So that's similar to the question we got earlier, but we can make sure we get that nuance in there. And then on a separate question, we have a senior class that fundraised and was planning on having a trip this spring that the company is refunding all but $8,000, and they are wondering if the CARES Act can help with the loss. And of course, so their concern is that the general fund expense, it was not a general fund expense, and this was money that the senior class raised. So I'll forward these on to Chelsea did get it, but I can forward it on to JC just to ensure that adding that as a question to the US Ed. And I do want to note we're going to go over this tomorrow, but we have uploaded the types of expenditures that we look at for the general fund allocations onto the CARES Act funding webpage, which is the webpage that Chelsea posted earlier. We will go over those in a little different format, but on there you'll see each type of expense and the coding for that expense that we look at. And again, we'll go over that in more detail tomorrow. So I think that was what we had planned today. Do you have anything else to add, Chelsea?
I have two more questions.
Okay.
One is, what data are you using? So you said Jackie ran allocations. What year did she use? So Jackie used the data that we had for FY20. So this past year, the data that was available then, that is what we used. We're not using anything that is a projection of the future or historical data. And then the other question, N counts for private schools. Where would I find those? So if you are curious, how many private schools are in your region and what do we believe is the proportional amount? Shelley Chessie-Jeanreau, our Title II director, has that spreadsheet on our webpage, and I will put that link in the chat so that you can see that information as well.
Okay. Does anybody else from the department have anything that they'd like to add? And so if not, just a last call for any questions. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. Oh, wait, we have. So we did get a question, actually, do we envision any changes in private school tuition with respect to state maximum tuition or IVF? So as far as how it's calculated, I wouldn't envision any changes to that. But of course, as expenditures change for the school districts, that will certainly have an impact on private school tuition and IVF. Okay, so not seeing any other questions, I will now stop the recording.